And we're live. Welcome to the American Watchmen Roundtable. The gang is all here this week. Uh, I I don't really see at this point why we need to introduce ourselves, just because we always do. But we might as well stick to our usual methods of doing things. So I'm Sam Whitfield, and I guess I'll be moderating tonight along with Adam Hill, my co-host. So Adam, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll let the other two gentlemen.
Well, I'm Adam Hill. I'm one of the editors and co-founders of American Watchmen. I enjoy long walks on the beach.
I yeah, as do I, quite literally. So since I'm here in Florida, um, I guess Gabe or Jesse, whichever name you're going by these da these days.
I'm Gabe, and I'm a co-founder and editor of American Watchmen.
And finally, Mr. Red Power Tie there.
Actually, I'm just the talking tie. But I'm Josh, and I'm also a co-founder of American Watchmen.
So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we're here to discuss the blue wave or lack thereof. First off, I just have to say we were all kind of talking but before the break and in a Facebook chat, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but it seems like the news cycle just in general uh it goes so fast now. It's a little hard to keep up with everything that's been going on. I feel like we cram 5 years worth of news into a single year of news almost. It feels like. Um, with that being said, at the beginning of the year, the Democrats, were all saying that 2018 was going to be a big blue wave year in terms of the midterm. And now we're seeing that that is obviously not the case. Not only that, but the Democrats have shot themselves in the foot, or in Elizabeth Warren's case, shot herself in the foot with an arrowhead, I guess. So, anyway, guys, what are you? I'll just kind of open up. First, my co-host Adam, you have a lot to say about the blue wave or lack thereof. So, what's your initial reaction?
So all this time, I've always heard so many times, the watch out for the power of the rage of the Democratic Party. Basically, the Democratic Party rage machine. I mean, we've seen their rage ever since Trump got elected. I've also been told all year this year that the Democrat rage is going to be showing at the polls this year, and the Democrats are going to take over with their massive blue tidal wave, where they're going to take the House and the Senate and take back the majority of governorships, which we obviously know is not going to happen. However, they basically, in my opinion, shot themselves in the foot with this whole Kavanaugh situation. They could have gone into the Kavanaugh situation. They could have voiced their opposition in a respectful manner. They could have voted no against him, let the proceedings go, and they might have been able to keep traction on this blue wave. However, with the way that they handled things and the complete lack of civility thereof, I'm seeing an actual huge pickup in like polls all across the country. I'm talking to people on Facebook, and I'm seeing a huge uptick in a new rage machine called the Republican rage machine. Republicans are so fed up and pissed off with how the Democrats have been treating them, been talking about them all year. And I really think the straw that broke the camel's back was how they treated Kavanaugh during the confirmation process. So that's my opinion on that.
Adam, I would have to agree with you. Real quick, I guess my question to you would be, since you and I are both Colorado natives, I would have to ask. Colorado's been more like on the fence. They've been conservative in the past, and then in more recent years, they've been progressive. They're like Florida. They kind of tend to swing back and forth. Is there any evidence that the blue wave that the red rage machine, as you're calling it, is going to strike more moderate/liberal states like Colorado, would you say?
Yeah, with Colorado historically, just in general, being a purple state, it's kind of one of those states, kind of like Texas, where the entire state of Colorado is red, with the exception of Denver and Boulder, which are hardcore blue. But every other town, every other municipality, every other county in the state of Colorado has been bright red. With that
Right.
being said, I really think that with this whole Kavanaugh thing, and now how basically our Democratic governor candidate Jared Polis is basically he's taking outright radical socialist ideas and rebadging them as bold new ideas to reshape Colorado. And with a lot of the people out here, even like the Libertarian Party of Colorado, the Republican Party of Colorado, all that stuff, I think they're seeing through that, and there's a lot of us here Jared Polis basically wants to turn Colorado into California, and we don't want that. So I really think the voter turnout is going to be the biggest barometer in this, of course, but I do think that we have a chance, especially with how our Democratic governor, John Hickenlooper, has been his last couple terms in office. I think a lot of the Colorado voters are pissed off now, so I think we might see a Republican governor in November.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've considered maybe moving back to Colorado after I get done with college here, but the way pricing is in Colorado right now, just in housing alone, I can't do that, and a lot of it is because of these Democrat policies enacted under Hickenlooper. They're really hurting the economy.
Well, I mean, with that, on top of that, I mean, I completely agree with you, Sam. Like recently, Jared Polis is in favor of a massive Medicaid expansion. He's also he's badging it Medicare for all, which in the state of Colorado, if you look at like a few independent financial agencies out here in Colorado had done research on his plan, and his plan will almost double our state income tax to make that happen.
Wow. Which is what right now?
I am not sure. I do not have those figures.
But it'll make it like California probably if they're wanting to double it. So
Yep.
All right. Gabe, you're the analysis guy in terms of elections and whatnot. This is kind of your rice bowl, so to speak. So what do you see on the horizon for the red rage machine versus the blue wave, or the blue stream as it's coming out?
Well, I mean, I take the more systemic approach. So I mean, the thing is that I think the Kavanaugh confirmation, it did play a big part, I think, in really galvanizing the conservative base. But I also do think, and we're especially seeing it now, that there are just fundamentally structural midterm issues that Democrats can't solve. I mean, if you are reliant, for example, on Hispanics to say turn a Texas or an Arizona blue, if they don't show up, you're not going to win. And by the same token, if you are reliant on a coalition of young people who don't historically show up, it's gonna manifest itself before the election that you're not going to do as well as you thought you were. The thing about the Kavanaugh fight is that it has had more of an impact in the Senate than it has the House, because the House is already being fought in places where Republicans probably weren't going to do well in the first place. But, in the Senate, you have West Virginia, you have Florida, you have North Dakota, you have Arizona, Tennessee. Those are the places where if conservatives got excited and energized, the Democrats were going to suffer. And I think you're seeing that right now.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think the other thing that is really affecting the quote unquote blue wave negatively is, and Trump said this best earlier this week, the left has gone full on mob mentality here. That's basically all they can rely on is literal calls to violence now.
Yeah.
I mean, even Maxine Waters, and that, I mean, even Hillary Clinton. We've kind of been away from the podcast for a few weeks, but I did want to bring up, about like 2 weeks ago now. I don't know if anyone else saw this, but
Oh yeah.
but
Yep.
Hillary Clinton said something along the lines of, we can't be civil with the Republicans
Yeah,
anymore.
her exact words were, "The time for civility with Republicans is now over."
And given the whole attempted assassination attempt on Steve Scalise, and then the fact, I think I shared this on my Twitter profile too, the attack of a pregnant pro life woman by an Antifa protester that roundhouse kicked her. I think the resistance people, the quote unquote the quote unquote hashtag resistance, are really they're hurting their own cause when they resort to violence like this. They don't have any arguments.
Well, I think that's true. And I think, but I think that's playing more towards the conservative base and getting them excited than I think really convincing any on the fence voter.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think if you were gonna see this really, I mean, I guess it depends on your definition of backfire, but I think if you were really going to see this backfire on Democrats, you would see them falling back in the numbers in affluent, educated, suburban white districts, which are where they're going to do well, because those are the districts, at least in the House, that are recoiling against Trump. It's not happening. But what you're seeing it really galvanize a conservative electorate that was not going to show up at the polls unless they had something to unify them. And the one thing in the Trump era that continues to unite Republicans of any stripe is the Supreme Court.
I would agree. I would also say that the one thing that is consistent, whether it be Kavanaugh or whether it be the violence of the left, the one thing that's pretty interesting, and I think you and I talked about this before once when you came on my show, Gabe, or maybe it was the episode that you and I just did, the two of us.
I think it was you and I just did the podcast.
But you and I talked a few weeks ago about how typically the party in power of the executive branch, the Republican, so in this case the Republicans, usually the base doesn't turn out for midterm elections, so that's why the opposing party is usually able to take back Congress, or at the very least the House, just like in 2011 with Obama. But now we're seeing the exact opposite. I think that the Republicans are even more energized to go and vote now. So
yeah, I do agree with that. I think the one thing that really, though, should make Democrats worry, though, is that in the places that they need to win a majority, which are minority heavy states or districts, it's coming out now that they haven't done enough outreach to their particular target group, Hispanics, who are pretty actually apathetic about voting. And we've heard over and over about how Trump's tirades and his crackdown on immigrants is going to make them turn out and vote, and they actually aren't showing up. Like they're the group for Democrats that they were relying on, and it's coming out that they're not showing up. And so, like in places like Nevada, Arizona, Florida, which will determine partly control of the Senate, that has to be, that for Democrats, that has to be a huge slap in the face, because they have basically been saying, oh yeah, these groups are in the bag, we're gonna win these races because we've got the support of all these minorities and Hispanics, and they don't really seem to be following that script.
Correct. And this kind of brings us to the point of, Joshua always mentions kind of the cultural, I can't remember how exactly he puts it, but like we're starting to see a shift in kind of like a restructuring of the left-right paradigm. Now, Josh is muted, so I don't know.
I'm here. I just had it on mute. There was some background issues.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you had stepped away for a sec or what. So I wasn't ignoring you. I was just trying to fill time while I thought you were gone. But anyway, I wanted to kind of give you a chance here, obviously, to just kind of weigh in. Do you think this relates to your theory of the kind of like a cultural restructuring, or what do you think this lack of a blue wave is due to, Josh?
I don't think it has anything to do with my realignment theory, but
Oh yeah,
I'm not an elections guy, so I can't really tell you. I don't. There's not really a whole hell of a lot there for him to vote for, I guess. I don't know. That's not a real good answer, I know, but I don't do elections. I've got no idea on this one. I'm afraid. I will tell you for sure, though. I don't think it has anything to do with my realignment theory.
Okay.
Well, I'll disagree a little bit. I think it does, Josh, because one of the things in realignment theory is how different demographics have sort of realigned themselves, and Trump has inserted himself more into this election, I think, especially with the Kavanaugh brouhaha, than he had in the past. And I think it's playing a part in getting some of his sit on the sideline Republicans who are more dedicated to him than the party itself off the fence to actually turn out and vote for Republicans who aren't Trump.
I would have to agree just based on my observations, but
I guess I would agree that there are people who are more loyal to Trump than they are to the party turning out and voting this election. Although I would disagree in saying I don't think it has anything to do with my realignment theory. Namely, because thus far, if you look at Trump's policies and the Republican Party's continued policies, they're more or less business as usual. So if you have downscale working class whites coming out and voting for Trump, maybe it's for cultural reasons, but those cultural reasons were already there before Trump became president. I don't see much in the form of a shifting economic program, a more populist economic program being delivered. Where's my $1 trillion infrastructure bill? That's my usual pet peeve to harp on, but it's still not here. I don't see that as motivating these people to come out. If anything, it's the cultural issues, but those were already there before Trump became president.
Yeah, but they weren't. Yeah, but they were there, but they weren't consistently making these people go out and pull the lever for a Republican candidate, though.
I'll admit Trump's personality has, some mystifying impact. I'm not quite sure what it is.
Well, no, I'm just saying that's
but
the connection. Is that that Trump's allure to these voters to get them to pull a lever for a Republican is making them more consistent Republicans than being, say, a swing voter than they were in the past.
I don't know if that would prove that it's helping the realignment theory though, because put it this way: if you have swing voters who may have agreed with the Republicans on cultural issues and they agreed with the Democrats on economic or more populist issues, and then they're suddenly just becoming more consistently Republican because of a single president's personality, and that president's not actually doing anything to give them that more populist appeal, then I guess it wouldn't really point to a realignment. I'm not entirely. I've become slightly concerned lately. I guess I'll put it that way, but I've become concerned in terms of Trump enabling status quo instead of actually changing too much. I'll put it that way, but I don't see it as being part of a realignment. I'm not sure about that at all.
Josh, I think Trump already has changed the status quo in a lot of ways. Maybe not. I get what you're saying in terms of policy wise. I think it's still a bit a bit business as usual, but I think we are going to see more policy stuff change within the next 2 years. Right now, we've kind of had to spend the first 2 years kind of breaking through all of the PC cultural BS stuff with the left. And what's interesting is we're really starting to see the left, rather than trying to really save face on some of this cultural stuff and moderate their positions, they're going even harder in the direction of the whole cultural leftism and cultural Marxism, as evidenced by the fact that they're getting way too overly offended by NPC memes, and they're actually they're using our ability. They're citing our ability to meme. I'm not making this up either, as little reasons not to vote for us and prove that we're somehow Nazis. I don't.
I hope you're right, but I just can't. I can't imagine Trump putting forward something like Salvini's People's Budget in the next 2 years, or the Family 500 program in Poland. I would hope I'm wrong, and I hope you're right. But I just, at a practical level, I can't see him doing it, given the way things have been going at the Trump White House so far.
I think it depends. I mean, I think it depends on how you define realignment. I think, Josh, what you're defining as a realignment is more a policy level, whereas with realignment, for me, I'm defining it as electoral. Trump can do the same old crap year after year after year like every other president, but if it does get voters to support him who didn't, say, support a prior Republican, that is a realignment in a way. If you win 10 million new voters, but you do it by doing the same old shtick, that still is a realignment at the electoral level. The policy level is something separate. So I think
it still has to be connected, though. I mean, if you look at Richard Nixon's realignment with the Southern strategy, the Republican Party became more or less essentially became the party in both cultural and policy terms of the white guy. Some people have said that strategy was racist, and I'm not going to deny that I think it probably did appeal to racist elements in society at the time. But you can see that where policy related to personality, or whatever you want to call it, with this so far, if it's trying to appeal to downscale people by being more populist in tone, yeah, that's great. But at some level, there has to be policy in order for those people to be coming out and vote. Otherwise, I don't see it happening, I guess.
Speaking of policy, we are kind of living in a Twilight Zone, type universe now, because I will say this: I never thought I would see Kanye West at the White House in the Oval Office making policy shaping suggestions, to the President of the United States. And I'll admit some of his ideas, while they might not be laid out the best in terms of execution, I do like what he said about how we need to reform and modernize education standards to make them, more interactive and more fluid. The whole K through 12 industrial revolution factory, setup of education has pissed me off for years. And the fact that, Kanye is really pushing Trump to really change that is interesting. I'm not sure how good Kanye's approach to it, how realistic it is, but it certainly is interesting. So
I guess I'd be slightly more. I guess I'd slightly disagree with you on changing the with him on changing the education system too much. I think the way we do it at the public level is fine right now, except for maybe that we don't. In some states, we don't fund it as well as we should. I know that's certainly a problem here in Nebraska right now. But excuse me. I think if there needs to be a reform of our educational system, it's more direly needed on the on the collegiate level than it is in the K through 12.
Oh yeah, for sure. You won't get any argument from me there, especially, as someone going through that right now. But I'm just saying, I think getting rid of Common Core is certainly something that needs to be done. So Adam, you had a couple other topics you wanted to bring up. You had some questions for me and for a couple of us. So, what were those? I'll kind of turn the reins of the show over to you.
I'm trying to think what those were. You got to give me a second or put me on the spot.
Not trying to. I just don't want this to become Sam and his friends, more.
So I do have a question for you guys. I know polls and stuff can be taken with a grain of salt, but with the polls showing Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke in a dead heat before Kavanaugh, and then as of last week, the latest polls are now showing Ted Cruz in a 51-43 lead over Beto O'Rourke. Do you guys see this as being an epidemic starting to come across the country, where the polls might be starting to show a surge in Republicans?
I will defer that question to Gabe, at least initially, since he's more of the guy who knows how to read polls and whatnot more accurately. I'm the guy.
Depends where, but yes. The short answer is yes. The short answer is Kavanaugh has really helped Republicans because he has reminded them of the one thing that unites them in the Trump era, and that is the Supreme Court. I think also that the other thing that I think I do agree with, the one thing on Kavanaugh that I think has had a lasting short-term impact, and I think it will last through the midterms, is it really did polarize the electorate along partisan lines. So, I mean, like, for example, you might have had more Republicans in Texas who lean towards O'Rourke because they're like, okay, he's something new. This is not, I mean, it's a one-time thing. He's a one-time Democrat, whatever it may be. But the Kavanaugh nomination and the protests really, I think, polarized the electorate along their initial partisan inclinations. And if you're O'Rourke in Texas, that's bad, because there just aren't enough Democrats in, say, a Texas or a Tennessee, or I would dare say even in an Arizona right now, to get you over that hump. You need a lot of independents, and you need some Republicans. And if the electorate is entirely polarized, you're not going to win. So I think to answer your question, Sam, or answer your question, Adam, is yes, depending on the state. But I think ultimately, overall, it's undeniable that the Kavanaugh nomination, I think it basically saved the Republicans' majority in the Senate at the very least.
Adam, I would also answer your question, kind of just echoing off what Josh, I mean what no, not what Josh, what Gabe said. Sorry about that. Gabe, I would say that the other big factor here again is just the the exact polar opposite, of the two parties. Like I said, the left is no longer trying to even, moderate their um is no longer even trying to moderate their policy, or their people at all. We had Elizabeth Warren, just last week, still, pushing the notion that she's a Native American, and even lots of Democrat commentators on that side who were prominent liberals were saying, "What are you doing? Stop this! It's not helping us." She's pretty far out there. I would also say the other thing is we have gubernatorial candidates like we have the race here in Florida for governor between Ron DeSantis and Andrew Gwillem. Now, Ron DeSantis is a Trump, conservative. On the flip side, you have Andrew Gillum, who is basically he's basically a communist in everything but name in terms of policy. He's praised the way that California has been running things, and basically wants to turn Florida into new California. So he's very far to the left, and so I if I were the Democrats, I would say, okay, we need to maybe we need to go back to the party of JFK, but they're not even trying to do that or even come close to that. They're just going further and further out on the limb and embracing more and more crazy groups like Antifa and whatnot. So,
well, I think I think the interesting thing about the governor's races, and especially Sam, for you in particular in Florida, where you have a high profile Senate race and a gubernatorial contest, is whether those margins are going to be so small enough that you might, like, say, have Rick Scott win the Senate seat, but then have Gillum win the gubernatorial contest. But I think Democrats need to be. I think what's going to happen, honestly, especially in the gubernatorial contest, where I think Democrats are actually going to do well, just because there's voter fatigue in the states with how Republicans have run them. And ironically, I think that's because Republicans have run them so well, people are just inured to success. But they're going to run into, all these Democrat governors are going to run into the buzzsaw of GOP legislatures, and then you're going to have gridlock for 2 years. And that's going to showcase itself, I think, with an incredibly progressive Democratic base that is frustrated that they can't roll back the GOP policies at the state level. They can't roll back what Trump has done. And I think it's going to lead to them nominating a very, not just economically progressive candidate like Bernie Sanders, but also very progressive social candidate.
it's interesting.
I don't know.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I'm seeing more and more. Florida has a huge population of Cubans, and I shouldn't really need to say that because that's pretty obvious. But what's interesting is what I'm seeing, at least, is that the Cuban community here in Florida, particularly when it comes to the gubernatorial race, is really divided because we have the younger, voting base who aren't, who are, second or third generation generation Cuban here, and they're all for they seem to be all for Gillum for the most part. Then we have then we ha- then we have the first generation, or some of the older Cubans, or heck, even younger uh, first or second generation immigrants who are like, wait, why do you like this Andrew Gillum guy? He's basically like Castro, and there's a big fear of that with Andrew Gillum, particularly um, you know in the Cuban community, which I kind of find fascinating because usually the Dems like to think of racial voting blocks as all being unified or whatever, but in this case it almost seems like the ethnic group is split pretty significantly here in Florida.
Well, younger Cuban Americans are more liberal than their parents or their
Right.
grandparents. I think the thing I was reading an article the other day, which I think ties into, say, Gillum in Florida, is you have all these black progressive candidates running for governor, um, but they're not really appealing to, believe it or not, blacks. I mean, blacks are fairly they're the most solid Democratic voting group in the country, but I think that kind of masks the fact that they're fairly moderate on certain things. But say like Stacey Abrams in Georgia or Gillum in Florida, they're not moderate. They are hardcore progressive, and they are hardcore progressive to appeal to not blacks or minorities, but all the white liberals in the suburbs.
Oh
And
yeah. Oh
and
yeah.
and
Of
I and I think
course.
and they're playing on the race card to get blacks to show up and vote for them in the same numbers that they would if you were a moderate white candidate, but they're trying to combine that with turnout in the liberal white suburbs, um, which is an interesting new coalition for Democrats. And whether there'll be, I mean, I'm wondering whether there'll be little itty bitty fault lines that start popping up in there that in the future maybe a Republican beyond Trump can actually exploit.
Yeah, here's the other crazy thing. Again, this goes back to the Twilight Zone. Like it or not, when Kanye West came out as being a Trump supporter, a MAGA guy, and saying a few weeks ago on SNL that not every black person has to be a Democrat. Okay, obviously that's something that political people like Clarence Thomas or Thomas Sowell or Larry Elder, who are black conservatives. Anyway, that's something that we've been saying. But Kanye West is a pop star, and I'll tell you what's interesting is to watch uh, younger black uh, people that I know come up to me and like start to ask me like political questions, about like being conservative and being a Republican. These are generally people who are either atypical or just default liberals, and so and so that's another reason why I brought up the realignment earlier, because in my mind, it's kind of that whole cultural and demographic shift, of voters changing. But I never thought Kanye West would be the one to affect it, so that's why it's so strange.
Well, and I think
You
you
know.
tend to, I think that also manifests itself. I mean, Democrats are beating themselves with a hammer trying to figure out why they can't turn out Hispanics. And I think that's the same concept. Hispanics are not inspired by, say, a racial appeal, and they might be throwing up their hands and going, "We don't like Trump, but we like the economy. So what's the reason to show up and vote if I'm doing fine? As long as they leave me alone, I don't need to worry about it."
Well, it's funny. The other thing with lots of Hispanic voters is it almost seems like I've talked to some of them, and they've said it seems like the Democrats are only interested in uh, in our brothers and sisters over in Mexico and bringing them in illegally, but they're not doing anything to help us here who are already here legally, which is an interesting take as well. So, and one that I really can't dispute.
I would just like to point out that tying into an article I shared with you all the other night, the fertility rates have historically been a good measure of how well a country's economy has been doing. But the Hispanic fertility rate has actually dropped 26% between 2007, or it was 2008, it might have been 2007, 2008 to 2016. So I'm not entirely convinced that the reason they're not voting for the Democrats is because they're satisfied with the economy. It might just be, particularly in the case of those who are first generation immigrants or who struggle to assimilate or speak English or whatever, that they might just be apathetic about the election. I'm not so fully convinced that they're voting, that they're not turning out because they think the economy is fine. Because if they think the economy is doing fantastic, it would make sense for them to turn around and actually vote Republican, but we don't see them coming out in droves to do that either.
Well, I think for Hispanics that's definitely true. Since a lot of Hispanics are first, second generation and aren't integrated into our politics yet.
That's very true. I definitely do think it's, Josh, I do agree that it probably is apathy. I'm not saying that like they're all going hardcore MAGA, but what I am saying is the fact that they are apathetic. Even so, that's different enough for the Democrats that they're apathetic, rather than just automatically voting for them. So
I just wanted to highlight the point on the economy. I'm not going to try and diagnose why they're not turning out and voting for Democrats because, quite frankly, I'm probably as amazed as the Democrats by the fact that their traditional voting blocks aren't coming out and churning out for them like they normally would.
hey,
I think if anything, what the midterms are showing us is that Republicans are turning out at a higher rate than an incumbent party typically would for the midterms.
yeah, look, I'm just amazed and awestruck by all of this, really. I mean,
I think it illustrates kind of what we had sort of seen under Obama, but it never manifested itself in a midterm because Obama was a crappy midterm president. He did nothing for his party and basically wiped him out. But it really truly is encapsulating the now I would call a historic nature of what the Democratic coalition has become, which it's basically become an upstairs downstairs coalition where you have it basically now is fully you have rich white liberals who show up and vote, and then you have poor minorities show up and vote. But because Democrats have also now essentially ceded the white working class to Republicans, they don't have anybody in the middle to draw on. And so keep in mind, this is the first midterm we've seen under an incumbent Republican since 2006. So all these changes we haven't been able to see in a midterm with an incumbent Republican president until now.
yeah, that's a good point. So do you think the Dems will have any traction whatsoever in this phase, or do you think it will be a complete red rage machine, as Adam calls it?
Well, I'm still saying the Democrats take the House, but their majority in the House will basically be non-functional. They might have a few seat edge in the House when the dust settles. Republicans, I think, will retain the Senate. Their majority kind of depends on whether Democrats rebound in Nevada or Arizona. Because I think at this point now, Republicans are guaranteed to take North Dakota. They're guaranteed to hold Tennessee and Texas. And I think Republicans will probably surprise either in Florida or Indiana or Montana. So, I mean, I think you could have a fairly strong Republican majority in the Senate and Democrats having a majority in the House, which would be an interesting play for the next 2 years with the presidential election coming up. But I think the real interesting storyline will be what happens in the states with the legislatures and the governors, because the polls are all over the place on those.
I will. As I said before, I don't follow elections too terribly. Midterm elections too terribly closely, so I can't comment on what's going on in every other state. But here in Nebraska, I'd say while our legislature is nonpartisan, but that's only on paper. And the Republicans will probably handily keep control of the legislature, although it does look like we may be shaping up for our first Democrat governor in a while.
Well, that's the other thing I have to ask. What does Democrat look like in more like Midwestern states like Nebraska? Because
well, the Democrat candidate for governor was a guy that was a Republican who left the Republican Party in order to challenge the incumbent governor. Realized he could not run for governor as an independent, tried to start his own third party, passed the deadline, couldn't do that, got in as a Democrat, and then in a shocking and perhaps the biggest political shocker anybody here was expecting, he wound up somehow winning the Democrat primary. Although, as a caveat to the party, his lieutenant governor is much more traditionally liberal. I guess the only thing you can say about him from where he bucks with the governor and the Republican Party here is that his name is Bob Christ, is that he supports Medicaid for all, and not Medicaid for all, sorry, expansion of Medicaid that's on the ballot here this November. And is more willing to raise taxes than Governor Ricketts and his Heartland Foundation have been.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I will say that brings up a good point, Josh, because we have Medicaid expansion on the ballot here in Idaho too. It'll be interesting to see what happens with initiatives like Medicaid expansion in pretty red states. And it'll kind of give us a feel for, even in very Republican or conservative states, how much wiggle room there is for more government policies on those types of things. Because I think most people think of Nebraska and Idaho as, oh, they're just Republican conservative states, but there's Medicaid expansion on the ballot in Utah too, and it could conceivably pass in all three states, Idaho, Utah, and Nebraska, which would kind of bust that viewpoint of, you got to run as an ultra conservative to win in those places.
Well, Nebraska, speaking for my own state, not the others, we're sort of the heartland of American populism. We spawned William Jennings Bryan, the original populist granddaddy in our country's history. And historically, it's our Republican base here tends to lean more to the center, if not the left, on economic issues. They overwhelmingly passed the initiative in 2014 to raise the minimum wage up to $9, even though the state Republican Party went out of its way trying to stop that. And right now, the numbers are looking like Medicaid expansion will probably pass as well. It's interesting that only the governor is the only major Republican who is willing to publicly oppose that. If you look at the actual state senators across the districts here, they either they do one of two things. They play mum on it, which is they don't talk about it at all, or like the Republican candidate in my own district, they say, well, I'll stick my finger in the wind and see which way it blows. He just says that if the people vote for it, he's for it. If they vote against it, he's against it. And in my district, it's weird because there is no Democrat running for legislature. It's a Libertarian versus the Republican, and she is dogmatically against Medicaid expansion, unfortunately.
Well, that is true. I mean, that I think we all knee jerk think that if you're a Republican, like I think we all knee jerk think that like a state like Idaho or Nebraska or Utah, which is strongly Republican, that oh, you're against the minimum wage, oh, you never expand Medicaid. One of the interesting things about 2016 was that virtually every state that Trump won, they also passed a minimum wage hike. So, you didn't have all these voters showing up and being like, I'm going to pull the lever for a Republican and I'm going to pull the lever against like a government policy. So voters see things differently at different levels, whether it's governor, whether it's a federal race, whether it's a state initiative. Which is why I find like the Medicaid expansion here and in Nebraska so interesting, because it will kind of challenge the idea that a red state is automatically a red state on everything.
As my sort of statement to kind of start leading us out, tying it back into one of Sam's first questions to me, depending again on how you define realignment, I think, Sam, if you want to see realignment in the midterm elections, from my point of view, in a way, you're going to see it, like Gabe said, more on the state and local races on things like this Medicaid expansion, or if we end up having our quote unquote Democrat governor here in Nebraska. But I can't, and maybe I can't see it in the House and Senate because I don't pay attention to other people's House and Senate races. I pay attention to our own, which are kind of boring here in Nebraska. The Democrats have no way in hell of winning, and the actual people I wanted all lost trying to primary out the incumbents for our Republican nominees. So we'll probably end up with Deb Fischer again, and
oh yeah.
I think it'll be our next Senate election that'll be interesting. Will be Ben Sass, because I'm almost certain he's going to be primaried out by somebody. I know a lot of people in the state and the party don't care for him because of how he constantly he goes against the grain on Trump. But to tie into my original point, if you want to see realignment, I think it's more in the local and state races than in the actual Senate or House ones.
I agree.
Well, Josh, just to kind of reply to you, the reason I was asking about Nebraska initially is, right, here in Florida we have a full-blown MAGA conservative versus a communist. Same thing in the governor's race for California. All right, yeah, and same in Colorado, kind of. But in Nebraska, and in other I guess heartland states, it kind of seems to be like Republican versus like Republican, like it kind of reminds me of like Republican versus Diet Republican almost. So if that makes sense, there aren't really any like vast ideological oppositions in Midwestern states.
It's kind of that way, certainly in our governor's race. I think the major difference between Ricketts and Christ would be taxes and the Medicaid expansion. Other than that, they're both pretty social conservative. I think even though the Democrats aren't going to win a majority in the legislature, I think they probably generally think they have a better shot working with Christ than with Ricketts, because Ricketts has shown himself to be hyper partisan, which is why he's become so incredibly unpopular. And in our own district here, we have, as I mentioned, no Democrats are running. It's a Republican and a Libertarian. And in our second candidate debate we had between Laura and Tom Brandt, they actually wound up agreeing with each other on more stuff than they disagreed. So I would say that's a pretty fair characterization.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Nebraska is kind of a test. Well, not Nebraska, but I will say to your point, Sam, actually, that the kind of how far a Republican can push like ideology on a state would be Kansas. in a nutshell. Like, what's wrong with Kansas? Yeah, that's because in Kansas you basically have the Republican war. It's like Nebraska to the degree that Republicans can control the state, but there's a war in between. There's a war between the factions of the Republican Party, and it's allowed kind of Democrats to actually have a shot at winning the governorship.
Yeah, it's all very interesting. Well, we're approaching the hour, if we haven't already. So, any final thoughts that you guys would like to bring up? I think Josh kind of already did it, unless you have something else to add. But
I just want to apologize for not saying more tonight. I don't, as I mentioned several times, I don't follow the elections for congressional and Senate. I don't follow that closely outside of my state unless it becomes particularly, and by that I mean insanely interesting. Like what comes to mind immediately. What comes to mind immediately was Todd Aiken in 2012. I remember.
Oh gosh, good old Todd Aiken.
I remember passionately supporting his campaign after that went totally nuts. But otherwise, I don't pay attention to things like that outside of my own state when it comes to midterm elections. And so I didn't have much to say. I apologize for that, but that's all I wanted to add.
Hey Josh, hey Josh, it's fine. I'm kind of the same way. I do keep up with the Colorado race because I have friends and family who still live back there. So whenever I talk to them, they just kind of brief me on what's going on. Anyway, although Adam, I really appreciated your perspective, on that. So other than Colorado and Florida, I don't know too much about midterms either. So. I will just say kind of the one thing that did catch my eye is that I guess everyone's freaking out because Trump made like a joke about some candidate like body slamming a guy.
He went to So do you this? I'll run this through real quick and then we can close out. Do you guys remember last year the special election in Montana?
I remember.
A guy named Greg Giaforte.
Yep.
Oh,
so
yeah.
He won, and he's running for re-election. And obviously, right now there's a contest between Senator John Tester and the Republican who's running against him. But during the campaign last year, when Giaforte was running for the seat when it was open, he essentially body slammed a reporter because the reporter ticked him off. So when he won anyway, so Trump at the campaign rally, and Giaforte was there the other day, he made a reference to it. And that's what everybody's going nuts about. But see, the thing, it is that same thing again of where Trump supporters don't take Trump figuratively. They don't take him literally. Everybody else takes Trump literally. So like when Trump makes a joke about it, his critics go, "Oh, he's inciting violence." When his supporters hear him say it, they laugh and go, "Oh, that's Trump."
They tried to do that during the 2016 election.
Exactly.
If you remember, no one remembers this anymore. I did, because I've actually been a fan of Trump even before he ran for president, just as a celebrity. He was always fun to watch for me as a kid. I still remember when he body slammed Vince McMahon in WWE, and then I remember during the election, like they tried making a big deal. They tried making a big political deal out of that, like saying that he was too violent to be.
My first encounter with Trump was actually, now that you mention it, Sam, when he I believe him and Vince had a bet going on WrestleMania that year or something, and he got to come down and he shaved McMahon's head. So that was my first encounter with our future president. But to Gabe's point on the literally versus figuratively, I would like to see what our political and journalistic elite would have to say about Jair Bolsonaro from Brazil if he ever talked up here. because I would encourage our listeners just go and look up Jair Bolsonaro quotes because he makes Trump sound completely sane on Trump's worst day. So I'm serious. He does. I would love to see what the media would make out of him.
Send me some videos after the podcast. Put him in the AW thing. I'd love to read them, but anyway, I do want to get this wrapped up. So Adam, any final thoughts?
I'm just looking forward for the election to come up, and I mean, I really think that I might side with Gabe that that the Democrats might take the House, but it might just happen just a very slight majority. But I do think that we are definitely going to retain the Senate, and I actually think that that we're going to pick up a few more governorships.
I would have to agree with you on that, Adam. And as for my final thoughts, I mean, I don't want to brag, but I always kind of scoffed when the Dems said that that there was going to be like a huge blue tidal wave, but I never expected them to basically. Well, now it's not even like. Now it's not even like like I said, it's just a stream, not even that. So, it'll be interesting to see how bad they'll lose. Let me put it that way. But anyway, folks, thank you for listening to this week's American Watchman Roundtable. You can of course go to our website at AmericanWatchman.org. Not that it really matters because we don't update it that much anymore, but go ahead and visit us over there. Josh, you unmuted, so did you have a comment to make on that, or?
No, I was just waiting for us to go off air. I was going to say something.
Oh, okay. All right, and with that, good night, God bless, and God save this great nation. We'll see you next week.